Hi guys, this video is going to cover how to look after cast iron plants, or aspidistra elatior as they're also known. I'm going to cover all the essential aspects of care to help you keep your plant thriving, and I'm also going to discuss some of the common problems and try and help you fix them. My name's Andrew from smartgardenguide.com, and I really hope you enjoy this video. So cast iron plants do have a reputation for being easy to care for and tolerant of neglect. And this is true, but you'll get a much healthier, better looking plant if you care for it right. And this is what this video is all about. Let's start with lighting first of all. Cast iron plants prefer bright to moderate indirect lighting. They don't like direct sunlight because it can scorch the leaves or cause brown leaf tips. They also don't like very low lighting because this can cause the plant to grow much slower, and the new leaves will be smaller and they can even be deformed. I actually grew this plant in lighting that's not ideal. I was looking for a plant for my hall, which is quite dark and a little bit cold and drafty, but cast iron plants are ideal plants for these situations because they will tolerate these conditions and grow reasonably well, but they may not look their best. So this plant, some of the older leaves are quite deep green and they're a bit smaller and they're a little bit curled as they have tried to struggle on in the low light conditions. This summer, I actually moved my cast iron plant into a south facing room for a few months, and this was in an effort to try and stimulate a bit of growth. I kept it well back from the window so that it wasn't getting any direct sunlight, but once I moved it, I noticed almost within weeks, loads of new leaves started to grow and the plant really came to life. So some of the new growth in this plant is much healthier. The leaves are larger, they're lighter green, and they look great in comparison to the older foliage. And I'll put a video up on the screen now, just showing you the difference between the leaves in low light and high light, so you can really see why it's worth giving this plant the lighting that it needs. So the next thing I'm going to discuss is watering. And this is actually a really crucial aspect of care because it's the one place where you can actually kill your plant, and it's killing it with kindness or overwatering. Cast iron plants will tolerate underwatering and inconsistent watering, but what they won't tolerate is growing in soggy soil. So if you water your cast iron plant on a schedule without checking to see if the plant actually needs watered first, you could actually be running into problems. There are a few factors that make overwatering more likely, including growing in soil that doesn't drain very well, growing in a pot that's too big for the plant, growing in a pot without drainage holes, or if you just forget to empty the drip tray after you've watered your plant. So what I would encourage you to do is just feel the soil every few days and monitor how damp it is. And once the top half of the soil is dried out, that's the time to water your cast iron plant. And you should always water your cast iron plant thoroughly when it does need watered. I just water this one from the top, and I'll water it until water is flowing freely from the drainage holes at the bottom. I think this helps to wash out any salts or impurities that have built up in the soil, and I think it probably does reduce the risk of brown tips on the leaves. So water once the top half of the soil is dry, and you'll not go too far wrong. The next thing I'm going to move on to is soil, and I'm going to cover this next because it's very closely tied with watering. You want to make sure that your soil drains really well. So whenever you water the plant, the water shouldn't sit on top of the soil. It should soak straight in and run through the pot and come out the drainage holes reasonably quickly. At the same time, they do like a little bit of moisture retention in the soil, so a standard houseplant potting mix is not an unreasonable choice for cast iron plants, but I generally tend to add some sort of drainage amendment to the soil as well. Perlite, pumice, coarse sand are all appropriate options. A good choice of soil might be 2/3 of a standard potting mix and then like 1/3 perlite. That would work very well. In terms of temperatures, cast iron plants aren't desperately fussy. Anywhere between 60 and 80 Fahrenheit or 16 to 26 degrees Celsius is where they'll be happiest, but they can tolerate temperatures a fair wee bit below this and a fair bit above this. They are also more tolerant than a lot of houseplants to drafts, so whilst it's not great to put your plants near heating or cooling vents, cast iron plants won't suffer too much from this. In terms of fertilising cast iron plants, I fertilise mine monthly with a balanced water-soluble fertiliser, and I find that this makes a big difference to the growth of the plant. If your cast iron plant hasn't been fertilised in a while, it generally won't produce new leaves, or any leaves that it does produce will tend to be a bit smaller and less impressive looking. On the other hand, you don't want to fertilise your cast iron plant too much, because this can cause a lot of problems. If you fertilise too frequently or with a formulation that's too strong, your cast iron plant can develop leaf problems, most commonly brown tips and brown edges in the leaves, which can really spoil the look of your cast iron plant. You'll know you've been fertilising your plant too often if you're fertilising it with every watering, or if you notice white crusts developing on the surface of the soil, and this indicates fertiliser salt accumulation in the soil. If you see this happening and the leaves are starting to get brown tips and brown edges, you might think about repotting your cast iron plant, or you can flush the soil with water. And by this I mean take your cast iron plant to the sink and run water through the soil for a good 5 to 10 minutes and let the water run right out the drainage holes. And this will help to dissolve some of the excess salts in the soil, wash them out of the pot, and reduce the issues with excess fertiliser. In terms of humidity, cast iron plants are fairly tolerant of a wide range of humidity levels. They generally prefer medium to high humidity, but if your home is quite arid, cast iron plants will do all right. They can develop some leaf curling, they can develop brown leaf tips in response to low humidity, but they certainly will tolerate lower humidity levels very, very nicely. The next thing I'm going to cover is pruning, and this couldn't be easier. All you need to do to prune your cast iron plant is cut the leaves that you want pruned off at the level of the soil. And reasons that you might want to prune your cast iron plant are if some of the leaves come out and they have deformities or discoloration or brown tips and you want rid of them to improve the appearance of the plant, then go on ahead. Similarly, if the plant gets a bit big or bushy, you can thin it out or reduce the size of the plant by just pruning the leaves that you want off the plant to shape it. I did a major pruning on this plant about 2 or 3 years ago, and again, because I grow it in suboptimal lighting conditions, it's just growing very, very slowly, so it hasn't yet grown back to the same size that it was 2 or 3 years ago. That then brings us on to repotting. When should you repot it? Well, these plants can stay in the same pot for several years without any problem whatsoever. However, the rhizome will continue to grow over time, and eventually you'll see that fewer and fewer new leaves grow from the center of the rhizome, so the plant can start to look a little sparse. So just whenever you see the plant looking a little sparse, or if you see that it's becoming very, very root bound, the roots are growing around the outside of the pot or out the drainage holes, that's the time to repot it. And repotting it can encourage the plant to grow faster and grow healthier growth. When you are repotting it, it's generally a good idea to divide the rhizome, particularly if some of the rhizome hasn't produced an awful lot of new leaves. You don't have to, you can pot it up and create a bigger plant, but certainly repotting is a great time to propagate it, and propagating it by just taking it out of the pot and dividing the plant in two, dividing the rhizome in two or more than two is the way to go. The last thing I'm going to discuss is common problems on cast iron plants, and we've actually covered a lot of these things as we've gone through this video, but I really just want to summarize the main problems that I've seen with this plant. So first of all, brown tips in the leaves. These are hugely common and will appear for a number of reasons. Underwatering, excessive light, temperature stress, excessive fertiliser are all causes of brown leaf tips. Low humidity in some cases, although as I said, much more tolerant of low humidity than a lot of other houseplants. So there's no one solution to stopping brown tips on your cast iron plant. It's all about providing more consistent care and care that's more in keeping with what the plant wants. So get the light right, get the soil right, get the watering right, and don't over fertilize it. and you'll eliminate most of the brown tip issues. Overwatering, again, the most common issue. So if you want to keep your cast iron plant thriving and avoid any major problems, just watch the watering, check the soil every few days, and only water whenever the plant actually needs watered, rather than just getting into a schedule of watering it once a week or once a fortnight, or whatever your schedule might have been. The other thing, of course, that I mentioned was if you notice your leaves are deforming, if they're becoming curled or small and you can't work out why. And again, I've got a few here that are quite deformed and small, and this has been a combination of low light and underwatering that I have subjected this plant to. And I suppose some of that has been by design because of where I have the plant, and it's in such a big pot that it is difficult to move when it does need watered and I need to empty the drip tray. So I've generally given this not enough light and not enough water. So I hope you've enjoyed this video about cast iron plant care. If you've got any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments section below. If you think anything I've said isn't accurate or hasn't been in keeping with what you found with your cast iron plant, I'd love to hear from you. And if you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, because there's plenty more houseplant care videos to come over the next while. Thanks very much, guys. Bye now.